good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this session on reinventing manhood. We live in a gender moment. The notion of a binary between male and female is put into question. New labels for gender identities are sprouting everywhere. And the whole system of gender seems to be in movement. Femininity has been examined and critiqued for a long time. Think, for instance, about Simone de Beauvoir's famous book, Le Deuxième Sexe, from 1949. It was a question during the second feminist wave. But masculinity seems to be rather new on the agenda. And what we see as typically masculine is the result of our gender lens. For example, in an experiment with meerkats, it was observed that female monkeys preferred playing with small pots. Now, in our human world, cooking is indeed associated with femininity. But why would that also be true for monkeys? And is that really the case? To answer the question, what is masculine, we can look, for instance, at character traits, like enjoying science fiction or drinking loads of beer and burping. But what if I, with these boobs, put on a Star Wars t-shirt, which I really like, and also drink loads of beer, which I like, and burp, which I also like, then that's also considered to be masculine. You can look at a certain masculine essence as well, like taking risks, for example, or aggression, or maybe responsibility. The question then becomes, which aspect do you choose and why? And that is something on which men themselves cannot agree. Does manhood need reinventing? What could or should manhood look like? And who should do this reinventing? My name is Linda Duits. I'm a social scientist specialized in gender and sexuality, and I'm your moderator today. I have three amazing guests for you, who we will hear from in three blocks. One on manhood and language with political scientist Munir Samuel. Munir, please come forward. One on manhood within culture with Baba Tarawali. Baba, please join. And one on manhood and biology with artist and researcher Mary Magic. Applause, please. So let me introduce my guest a little bit further. Munir Samuel is a political scientist, journalist, cultural entrepreneur, and performance artist who investigated the meaning of sex and gender all over the world. He co-curated the exhibition What a Genderful World in Wereldmuseum Amsterdam en Rotterdam, and is the author of the renowned book Je mag ook niets meer zeggen, een nieuwe taal voor een nieuwe tijd. You can't say anything anymore, a new language for a new time. And you have a website, munirsamuel.nl.
Don't Google it right now, later.
Munir, can I give the floor to you?
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. It's my attempt and endeavor to do a very short, brief presentation. Oh, sound. Looks now. Yeah, nee. Let me see. Is it on? Should be on.
There's somebody rushing down here from the tech department.
It is on. Okay, something's right here. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna get you a different mic.
And we're gonna get a different mic. These things always happen early in the day. Yeah.
Never mind.
Sorry?
I can yell, but then the online audience will not.
Nay, if you're yelling, then nobody can hear you. Yeah. If I had a mic, then I could just hand it to you. I never really liked these headsets, do you? No, nobody likes them, right? Yeah, they're uncomfortable, and when things like this happen, you cannot share your mic anyways. But somebody comes rushing down with an old-fashioned held hand microphone.
Better.
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Here, the floor is yours.
And now I need to redress, of course, because I am vain. Anyway,
So, there we go. Do I still have 4 minutes?
You still have 4 minutes, of course. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
So, my book, the last one that I wrote, You Can't Say Anything No More, consists of 400 pages. That's way too much. But so I usually bring it back to a crash course of an hour, and now I have 4 minutes. So this is going to be a challenge. But there is something very specific that I realized about the Dutch language, which also actually has a lot of similarities with the English history, although there are some differences. And when you look at the origin of the Dutch language, and I'm waiting for my presentation to start. Yes, perfect. The Dutch language actually doesn't exist that long. So if we think about the medieval century, we don't really have much Dutch writing. Maybe some people that have had Dutch lessons in class know about the Vos Reinaarde, but that's about it. We don't have so much in Dutch writing till the English decided to translate the Bible in the English language in the early 1600s, creating the King James version of the Bible. And then the newly Protestant Dutch, although the Catholics have always been the majority in the Netherlands, but not many people know that, decided that they wanted their own Bible in the Dutch language so that people could read the Holy Word of God. And so the Dutch Protestant theologians went to the Staten-Generaal to get a subsidy to translate the Bible in Dutch. But there was no Dutch language. We had many different accents and Fries and Limburgs, but not a specific standardized Dutch language. And so they chose the dialect of Haarlem for that then to become the Dutch language as we know it, and to translate the Bible from Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek into this language. Now, the Haarlem dialect, of course, lacked a lot of words like caravan, camel, and palm tree, but also benevolence, mercy, grace, and all these typical Christian words. And they made very specific choices because this book, the Holy Book of God, for me as well as a Christian, was translated through the lens of these white Protestant regions that we see on these beautiful paintings of Vermeer and Rembrandt. So, the first thing they did, they made God a he, even though the English chose for God to be a they, thou, them. Therefore, the English have had a non-binary pronoun, whereas the Dutch still didn't have one till 2017, when it was finally elected by a bottom-up election, and die, diens, and hen, hun was selected. But most Dutch people don't know how to use it, and if they do, it is with a smirk, with a sighing, with all these extra violent communication. The other thing they did, they made God this father, this man. And for the word El Shaddai, which means the God with the breast, which is used 48 times in the Old Testament, they translated it in the Almighty. Now, a God with breast that seduces you, that feeds you, that has enough love to put you on her chest is a very different image of God than the Almighty. And then for El Rahum or El Rahim, which means the God with the womb, they translated that in the merciful one. And when Muslims pray Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in the name of God, the benevolent, the most merciful, they actually pray the most womb one. But most Muslims don't know that. And in that same time also, the Dutch began their great expansion, or better said, the exploitation of the world all over, many countries as well that most Dutch people don't know. And they started to investigate the other. And everything and everyone was the other, but this white male. And you can see that clearly in the Dutch language when you look at what is used as a curse or a slang. Basically, every identity, including being a woman, as well as most diseases or challenges, physical challenges, mental challenges, as well as ethnicities, are used as a curse and a slang, but the white, straight, heterosexual, better educated or theoretically schooled male. There is no curse or slang in the Dutch language for him. Not cheesehead, which was never a curse for Dutch people anyway. It was invented by themselves, and a woman or even a person of color could be a cheesehead, although we should all stop eating cheese. Other thing, not asshole, because most white men think I'm an asshole at this point of my presentation. So there is this problem with the view, the image, the way the language still excludes and includes people, and who is taken as the standard perspective. It is him. Well, the first theme of my book, it consists of 5 themes, is also the most difficult one. I have found that there is more agreement on the genocide in Gaza, which is to say a lot, than on gender diversity in the Netherlands. And I get more backlash in my presentation about gender diversity than about me stating that there is a genocide going on in Gaza. And it has a lot to do with the lack of information or the clear disinformation between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. These 3 things are put on one big pile. So let's say you see on the echo, or at least the doctor says, sees a small little penis, therefore it is a boy. The boy, of course, is straight, unless it acts feminine. Oh, help, we have a gay son. And if he starts wearing a dress, now she is a transgender. And all these things had nothing to do with each other, but that also has to do a lot with our biology class. So till 2023, we didn't have a clitoris in the Dutch biology books. Then finally, this image was put in the Dutch biology books to be then taken out within half a year because it was too disturbing. What do we see here? That all the things that we make up and we tag on to women, even before they are born, at that terrible gender reveal drama that you know as a gender reveal party, that actually a woman simply has a person with a clitoris, better said, excuse me, has a micro penis, or better said, a person with a penis has a macro clitoris. I think that's a nice new word. And that basically the genitals are pretty similar. But this image, of course, is very disturbing, not only because it reveals that there's not so much difference between male and female genitals as we thought, but also that the sexual interest of a woman or a person with a clitoris might be more focused on the clitoris than on penetration. Very difficult for voluntary penetrating men. For Gender Forward, I investigated gender diversity through time and age, and I have no time to go into it, but you actually see that gender diversity has been part of every single culture through more than 12,000 years of human history, but in Northwestern Europe. And that Northwestern Europe became the standard for the rest of the world then for gender diverse people, or transgender people, non-binary people, genderqueer, and all sorts of other gender diversities to be excluded. And there is one thing we should clearly note, and then I will stop. It is not true that there are only 2 sexes, even not on basis of genitals or chromosomes. We learn there is XI, XY, and XX, and maybe a small exception of XO. But in fact, we have XXXY, XXXXO, and there are dozens of other diversities on basis of chromosome and sex, which doesn't say anything about gender identity. And I found that when I explain to people that there are actually more than 2 sexes, and I even remind doctors on big doctor trainings, and medical trainings, that there are more than 2 sexes, then people find it less hard to accept that there is also then more gender diversity. And why we don't learn this with biology, even though it's shared common knowledge in the medical field, I find very political.
Yeah, thank you, meneer. Would you like to respond to this? I'm asking the panelists. I think in particular, an interesting point that you're raising, meneer, is that this is really something that you tie or is tied to Northwestern Europe and to Christianity.
And the US, yeah, certain type of white Christianity, though.
Yeah. So at the same time, there's this idea propagated that this gender movement is sprouting in these regions, that we are the best, that we're, as they say in Dutch, a guiding country, een gidsland. So we fuck it up and then we pretend that we are the ones that are going to unfuck it.
Well, the thing you hear most, I think, is het wordt opgedrongen. Don't push it, don't force it upon us. Which is, by the way, a very typical Dutch word, opdringen. Dring het ons niet op. And the idea that I lack freedom when you ask me, for example, to change the pronoun and call you a he or a them. I don't find that many people consider themselves a guiding country in this remark. They find it too much, too fast, too quick. You ask too much of us, or you are too much ahead in time, whereas we are behind in time. And we have suppressed gender diversity all over the world with this colonial horrible experiment. And now you find that through especially massive subsidies in the US, this whole transphobia is even more exported and distributed online. And it has massive impact on the acceptance of gender diversity, but it also challenges masculinity because it makes masculinity an ever smaller entity. It also takes away the freedom for men to express themselves in a more gender diverse way without losing their masculinity in that sense.
What do you mean it makes masculinity smaller?
Well, if you believe in an ever more binary world, then you have to make the depiction of the man even more hyper-masculine and women more hyper-feminine. And you find that even with the way women wear their hair right now. In the 90s, everybody had it short. Now I find it's very hard to find a woman my age or younger with short hair, whereas men tend to be more masculine, more beardy. I have to say it looks nice on me, but that's another thing. And you find ever more Andrew Tate kind of ideas about being a man, grabbing it by the pussy. Look at Trump and his popularity. It's boosted on endangered men that feel very challenged and threatened in their masculinity. And so you get like blow up caricatures of or cartoons of what a man or a woman is supposed to be. Whereas you consider gender more as a spectrum, then it gives us all more freedom to express ourselves in more diverse ways. And I did many tests in different on different festivals and different companies where I showed people that gender and sexual orientation and sex are three very different things in a cubic. And so you had 3 axes. One for gender diversity, one for sex, and one for sexual orientation. And when I gave the men the chance to be very feminine, however, not being gay, suddenly they would all move on the X into a more feminine way, as long as they knew it would not turn them gay in the perspective of the others. And I think this also reveals a lot of suppressed homophobia or homo-hatred or gay phobia. So what you find is that people, when they feel the freedom to express their gender differently without being less heterosexual, they're also willing to move more. And so it shows just so much about our internalized sexism and homophobia in the end.
Yeah, and it points towards the importance also of a more intersectional lens in looking
Yes.
at these things. Yeah, Baba?
Thank you very much, Mr. Munir. Yeah, and you bring a lot of things in your presentation, which I find very interesting.
Great.
And but also very educational in terms of knowing more and more. It brings me to the idea of my grandfather who tells me that education makes us sometimes very stupid. Because when you know more, then you have a lot of choices, you become confused. And why I'm saying this because in most African countries, we didn't have names for this. We just accepted what it is without putting things in boxes. And why we did that? Because we believe when you put emphasis on something, you make it bigger. Anything you put too much attention on, it grows. So what happens with naming homosexuality or gay or all the names, it's been exported, as you rightfully said, from the United States, the evangelic. They brought them to Africa, making these things very much, putting names on them. Which, of course, there is a lot of homosexuality in my tradition, in my culture, but there is a way we go with them. Like in Sierra Leone, for example, where we have this mask. Most of the men initiation of mask, these are carried by transgenders, homosexuals. They dance, and all the male mask in Sierra Leone are all feminine. And who dance in them, most of them are transgenders who are the dancers. And they are more in that cultural aspect, and they bring themselves, and we observe, but we don't give names. So the whole dispute began when the evangelic came to Africa, being sponsored by the United States, to bring Christianity and focus on this, because they lose the battle in the United States, so they want to bring it to Africa to fight. And then Africans became very much resistant, saying, what is this? Like in my culture in Sierra Leone, in also many African countries, even a man and a woman in daylight are not supposed to be very much sexually intimate in public. because sexuality takes place between the four walls. Eh? And that's, for example, in my private situation when I was in Sierra Leone, I started doing some business, and I had a girlfriend who came every morning to sit on my lap, and we sit down there, in the open. So a friend of my father saw that, and he went to my father to tell him, your son is not doing well. So my father came to me and said, he caught me there with a girl on my lap, and he told me, I don't want to see this anymore. He said, because you have to be very much focused on your work. A woman is a distraction for business. That's what he told me. And because in Sierra Leone, things happen at night. When it's dark, that's when sexuality takes place. In daylight, everybody, women are with men, men with men, and all these things, and in the evening, we come together. So it is my transition, perhaps I would say that more in my presentation, coming to the Netherlands, that I start to get deeper into all these topics. But just to make it short, going back to Africa and see how what Munir is saying here, make it clear, to Dutch public also to learn, is something very much of this time and something which we should embrace. Yeah. And
because Munir really emphasized also the responses that he's getting when he's talking about these issues. So I wonder, Baba, when you speak about gender in Sierra Leone and how this sort of gender system was imposed in colonial times, what kind of response do you get from white Dutch people here?
Of course, white Dutch people, they see it as very primitive, that we are not advancing, we are not trying to understand the issues of now, of today. And then my question is, because let me say, not only reaction from the Dutch people, in Sierra Leone also I get people who react very aggressively sometimes, saying you are making this thing so much a problem, which is for us not a problem. I said it's not a problem for us, but the world is now globalized, and this we cannot go without, because this will influence us, and we have to be prepared for it. And that is the reason why really when I wrote my book, the Man, the Tame Man, because of this, because I was struggling also, fighting it here and also fighting it there, trying to see where I belong in my own story.
Yeah. I would like to respond to something. The idea of homosexuality and heterosexuality was only invented by an Austrian journalist in 1868. So since then, we even have a term like heterosexual and homosexual. Before that, we were simply sexual. Mm-hmm. Well, I prefer not to have too many tags, especially because by lack of any real identity here, we start to attach a lot of focus on our sexual orientation and our gender identity, but we forget we have a gender identity, we have a sexual orientation, we are not our sexual orientation, we are not our gender identity. For all the things I have, I am so much more. And so we do, I think the LGBTQ community, in its fight for its rights, has a tendency to turn it into yet another religion, with their flag, their own nationality, basically. And by coming up with a new term every single day, we become very exclusive instead of inclusive, because most of us have several of the characters of the acronym. We might be and transgender and queer, or and homosexual and amorous and asexual, like that. But with this whole LGBTQ acronym, it becomes like this one particular aspect of this entire canister, and we should be very careful not to reduce ourselves to this one thing, if it is skin color or religion or whatever else. But in the same time, we should be watchful not to say, so a pride is not necessary, or any of these texts are, or focus emphasis on homosexual identity or any other sexual orientation is wrong because it makes things a problem. But because the fact is, the world in itself is problematic in its heteronormative views, no matter if you're in West Africa, East Africa, Northwestern Europe, or Southeast Asia. And this is partly product of male domination. It is part of religious and cultural practices, as well as the modern tendency of this Anglo-Saxon culture that is so heteronormative and toxic in every single way. And I think we have to find a way in which cultures can have their own sexual freedom and sexual orientations as they know it in their practices. So to give an example, in Morocco, in Jemaa el-Fna Square...
I'm gonna cut you short here,
Okay,
because we also want to hear from the other speakers. But yeah, maybe I can let you finish this example. Finish the sentence, yeah.
They had many trans women dance in the square, just like you said. And it was a common practice. Till a couple of years ago, too much Dutch Moroccans, Belgian Moroccans, French Moroccans became so aggressive when visiting Marrakesh and seeing these trans women dance, that now it is banned in the square for public safety. And this shows how even the people with different cultures here get adjusted to the heteronormative norms here, to the point that they cannot even appreciate their own culture in its sexual and gender diversity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Munir. We will hear more from you later. Baba Tarawali is a writer, journalist, and columnist for Trouw. Tarawali fled Sierra Leone in the 1990s because of the violence of war and endured a 7-year asylum procedure in the Netherlands. During this procedure, he wrote De God met de blauwe ogen, The God with the Blue Eyes, and later published works include Gevangen in zwart-wit denken, Trapped in black and white thinking. I'm going to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Can I stand? Or
yes, if you like, yeah, of course.
I would like to stand, yep. If it is okay with the camera. Good day, beautiful people. I'm originally from Sierra Leone, and I've been in the Netherlands for the past 25 years. Yeah. I wrote this book because of my own struggle. My cultural identity of being between two cultures, one foot in Sierra Leone, one foot in the Netherlands, and continually trying to balance in these two worlds. And I will bring you to my upbringing in Sierra Leone, where I was born and trained to be a man. And what this is to be a man? You know, I was trained that as a man, you have to walk in certain ways. You have to be strong, put your chest up, and let the people know, yes, I'm a man. And because we have a tendency to train our kids, because we believe that when you come into this world as a child, you come alone. A passage, you come alone to this world. But then you meet a people of tradition, culture, who brings you into a different world, who teach you. You are not prepared for that. You meet a certain culture, and that is the culture I met in Sierra Leone. They trained me to be a man. But for me, the first 7 years of my life, I was trained by my mother and my grandmother. And these two people were my examples. They trained me the way they want to train me. So I was more feminine in the way I do my things. I even imitated my mother, who really works very feminine, like the way she walks. And I was imitating her, imitating my grandmother, the way they speak, the way they talk, the way they communicate. I was trying to be them until I was 12, when my father came into my life to say, this has not been a good way of doing things. You look like a woman, you look like a girl, the way you walk, the way you do things. So I'm going to train you to be a man. Because the world outside there is very harsh. So you have to be strong to be a man. This type of way you've been brought up, you cannot survive the harshness of this world. So they start to train me really to be masculine. I have to start to walk like a man, start to go to the gym, do karate, do all these things to be strong. Because if not, I may not survive. So me coming to the Netherlands, I was surprised when I came to the Netherlands that the things I have been asked to stop, not to be, I met them here with men who just were themselves. You know, some of them very, very feminine, but they are married, have kids, and they have a life. So I was a bit confused between these two worlds, both worlds. So when I was writing my book, The Tame Man, The Tame Man, I was focused on three things. First, you have the tame man, then you have the untamed man, then you have what we call the cage man, the gekooide man. These are the three things, my observation in the Netherlands. We have the tame man, the untamed man, and the cage man. And the tame man is a man whose energy, sexual energy, is balanced between male energy and female energy. That's my conclusion. That people are saying the tame man, that's not a good word to use. But tame man, for me, was a man in balance. And then the untamed man was the man we are talking about here, toxic masculinity, and who loves women, but wants to lead and wants to decide what the woman does. And then we see them as men who are very authoritative, who are very much toxic, because these men, most of them have learned that this is the way to be a man. And I was part of that manhood when I came to the Netherlands. Then the last one, the cage man. These are men who think that women are controlling their lives, that the tradition and culture is against them. Like the untamed men, especially in African countries, also in some Arabic places where we have different type of cultures, the tame man, the untamed man, is a man who was trained to be that. But the thing is that the society and culture and the laws protect the untamed men. And that's why they are able to be on top of things. But in the Netherlands, you have laws that try to be that equal. And because of that, the production of cage men came to reality. Because in my observation, I came to notice that cage men, the whole thing we call family dramas, when a cage man escapes, it becomes very dangerous. These are the ones who stalk and who kill their wives and kids and all these things. So they have the feeling that the society, the laws of the country is not protecting them. When they separate with their partners, with their wives, they lose everything. So that anger I saw in the society in this country. So coming back to this topic of manhood, what is it to be a man? What is a man? So going back to my reaction to Munir, we have put labels on them, and we have made it so difficult for ourselves that we're in this struggle. The same goes to the fight for migration. I think the whole problem we have with right extremism in this country, or in Europe presently, is the fact that we have succeeded as migrants to get good jobs, to get education, and to compete with the ones who say, okay, I'm a typical Dutch person. So that competition has created a kickback, a fight against. And that is what we are seeing happening in the present situation we are living. Because we have come to a situation we are in, people who don't accept are fighting back and fighting very harshly. And that's the reaction, that's the point we have arrived. So what is the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Baba. Do you want to respond?
Well, I think it's so interesting to hear your perspective about the cultural boundaries of gender and the cultural expectations. I'm coming from the perspective of molecules. And so it's so interesting to see how the topic of gender and sex and reproduction can be approached from so many different angles. Hearing you talk about your origins, it reminded me also of my upbringing and the expectations that were put on me. Because for Chinese women, they have certain expectations that are very domestic, and they must take care of the family, whereas if it's a son, the son can go and make a career for themselves. And so I felt also the restrictions and the limitations of the body I was born into. And then what also I felt resonance with is this kind of the cross-cultural, right? So when you migrated to the Netherlands, how you had to grapple with those changes and how the expectations also changed. For me, I'm Chinese, but I grew up in Los Angeles. And I still remember my first encounter with whiteness, with this American whiteness of individuality. And I always found myself comparing, why do I feel less freedom in a Chinese body And then for an American body, or a white body, it's much more about finding who you are and manifesting your destiny. So I feel like these limitations are areas for transformation. And I'm so glad that you were able to, craft your story into a book and share about these categories. Yeah. I want to pose the question of, could we ever arrive on a definition of gender where we all feel free? I question this all the time because, I think so much of Western cosmology is based on drawing lines, making boxes, making categories. But there's a violence in that. There's a violence when you don't fit into those boxes. So can we still craft, or can we still draw lines? Because, boundaries are important, right? But can we still draw lines where we respect everyone's freedom of expression?
So when you say gender free, do you mean gender binary free?
Well, it's like how Munir mentioned that there's so many different genders, but we're only concentrating on two. Mm-hmm. Because somehow we've built a security around having only two, but secure for only the heteronormative, the heterosexual, right? Yeah. So can we
and then not even for all heterosexuals, I would say only the male heterosexual, because if we are really honest, the position of women in the Netherlands is not that great. And it's very interesting to me when I look at the International Gender Gap Index that predominantly Catholic countries have a way better standing regarding women's rights than Protestant ones, which makes me think that praying to Mary has a value after all. Because really, if you look at the International Gender Gap Index, the Netherlands all the way in the 34th position, and almost every South American, Southern European, and many African countries with a predominant Catholic origin are way higher if it's about capital, if it's about women in power, if it's about freedom of movement, and many other aspects, which is very interesting, I think. Check the World Economic Forum for this data.
Also, I think when I tell newcomers in the Netherlands that we have Orthodox Christians where young girls are not allowed to wear trousers, they're usually very surprised that we have this and that we allow that to happen. And I think there's a sexist side to Protestantism that we don't really remark upon that much.
I think to come to your question, for me, I think that we should focus on the right to love who you want to love.
Yes, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Because love is very much natural to every human being. So let's just allow ourselves to love. Love is the freedom we should pursue. Because if I see people say, yeah, but I don't like what you love, but it's not you, it's me. I have a right to choose who I want to love. So going back to my own tradition, I'm not anti-tradition, anti-culture, but I also have problems with my own culture and background. And I discuss it with them, because recently I gave a lecture about who is the owner of life, who is the owner of the child. According to the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which says I am because we are, the child, it takes a village to raise a child. The child is not from the woman alone. The woman is the protector. The child is not from the man. The man is also a protector. The child is not even for the mother earth. It's not the owner of the child. The mother earth is also part of the galaxies. So it is so broad, and that type of thinking, to think into the world of, we came somewhere divided into the world of the unborn, the world of the living, and the world of the living dead. So it is so complicated. So what helps is to use our presence in this world to love each other, because that comes out naturally.
Yeah. I think it's an important point also to remark how much of our patriarchal thinking is tied to this kind of nuclear family of father, mother, and 1.2 or I don't know how many children. Yeah, that's the model here.
Because it's
Do you want to briefly respond?
Yeah, because it is the capitalist system that found out that the nuclear family is the most productive one to keep the system in check. If you get too much community-based living, then you can have an easily uprising or protest or demonstration, etc., etc. And I do love the idea, but there's one thing. When we talk about being free to love the other, we're talking again about romantic and sexual feelings. But there is one step before that, to be able to love ourselves in the way we are, even when our behavior or characteristics or even facial features don't fit a specific gender identity or gender notion. So before you are, the first thing a child says most often after they know mama, papa, within 2 years, is, I'm a boy, I'm a girl. And when they cannot say that, for the reason that they don't know what they are or they don't feel aligned with this, immediately becomes problematized. But the first feelings of love only start at 5, 6 years old. So there is something before loving the other, and that is really loving ourselves in the way we are. And this is a very complicated matter when society constantly tells you, but you're not a man, or you were so beautiful, now you're no more beautiful because you transitioned, or you failed in transitioning, or you are, I see a woman, so you stay a woman, or non-binary doesn't exist. Like in the Dutch language, there is still no alternative for sir, madam, cousin, neefje, nichtje, oom, tante, broer, zus, oom, opa, oma. So you cannot even address a person. It really doesn't exist in the language. How violent is that? And how can you love yourself when you don't even have language for yourself? And there's one picture, if you could go back to my presentation, there's one picture I would like to show in this regard. To show the power of language, yes. Look at this image down. This is a family that consists of 5 genders from the Bugis people in Indonesia. Now, explain to me how to relate these people to each other, because I can't. I can say he, him, I guess, just by assuming that he is the him. I don't even know. She, her, I'm just making it up right now. They, them. And then, how do I relate these other people to each other? By the fact that we don't have the language, I cannot envision this in my mind. And that shows the power of language and if you exist or you don't exist at all.
I think I understand what you're trying to say, but if I make it very personal for myself, I know 100% sure that I love women. Of course, I love men, but in a different way. In Sierra Leone, I slept with my best friend on the same bed. We're in the same room. We sleep together. We walk hand in hand. We hold each other. Nobody makes a point out of it. Women do it to each other. No, nobody have a point to make about it. So love for me, you can love in different stadium. You can love your mom, you love your dad, you love, but the sexuality, and that is where it comes to the African perspective of Ubuntu, where we were trained that life is about continuation, and that's where the problem comes, because you have to give birth. You are trained to continue that the world can only exist when we continue to produce, to reproduce. Then the fact is, they teach you to do that. And for women, when they reach the menopause, they have a different initiation into wisdom, and they have a position in the society. But before that, the society have trained and tamed them to take care of the kids, to reproduce and take care of the kids. And when they are in that menopause, they are now equal to men in every aspect of wisdom and everything, because now it's not about the society anymore. They have reached a certain position where the expectation is different. They have, So if I look, like for example, let me just stay here for now.
I'm gonna. I see you. Yeah, because I want to also have some time to hear from our third speaker, Mary Magic, a non-binary Chinese-American artist and researcher working within the fuzzy intersections of body and gender politics and capitalist ecological alienations. Based in Vienna since 2017, they frequently use biohacking as a xenofeminist practice of care that serves to demystify invisible lines of molecular biopower, sorry about that. They are a current member of the online network Hacteria, open source biological art, and the Asian feminist collective Meiling Vienna.
I love the language.
All right. So thank you. Thank you so much to also the people on the panel. So in 2015, I started a project called Open Source Estrogen. And this gave me an insight into the molecular queering that's happening. I'm showing a series of videos, but I'm going to speak over them. So this video right here is actually a manifesto for a 6-point plan for hormone queering resistance. And I crafted this manifesto after I was doing all this biohacking, and the biohacking was, for me, producing a form of existential knowledge. And what I mean by existential knowledge is that we start to question how queer and how alien our bodies actually are, and how that relates to the porosity that we have and the permeability that we have with the environment. What open source estrogen opened up for me is that there is this molecular world where the molecules are literally trying to make sense of all the toxicities. It's changing the way that we approach gender, that we approach sex and reproduction. And then we have to consider what happens to our reproductive future when we are experiencing higher incidence of intersex bodies, hermaphrodite bodies. Literally, the planet itself is unable to digest and metabolize all of the plastic particles in the environment. So that's what I mean by an existential question. Oftentimes, when I do these biohacking workshops or when I give presentations, there is this fear and panic that arises. And as an artist, I was really curious about these cultural fears and what are these limitations that are keeping us in this trap, that we have to protect masculinity, that there's a fear of feminization, that we have to protect the heterosexual reproduction of the human species, to propagate the human species, and how this idea of future is intentionally leaving out queer bodies. It's literally saying that queer bodies, because they cannot reproduce, they do not have a future and they do not belong in the future. So as an artist, there's a lack of freedom that I see in society today. And there's a lack of love, and I'm so glad that we brought up the word love, because I see love as an incredibly radical strategy. I think these categories and these boxes that we've created, they are coming from a lovelessness. They're coming, and also the fact that there's a whole industry and capitalism that is built off of profiting off of this lovelessness. Like profiting off of the nuclear family, profiting off of the fear that men have to behave a certain way or else they're rejected, or even women. So, in the US, when a woman reaches menopause, they're actually considered like done, like they're not useful to society anymore.
Obsolete.
So obsolete, yeah, so that's the opposite, of like this wise status. So a lot of my practice is about addressing the fear. And I see that one way to do this is to acknowledge and to love the change, love the transformation, and love every phase of this transformation. Love the alien in you, because we all have an alien body. There's no body on this planet that is not exposed to the residues of industrial capitalism. The plastics, from petrochemical, agricultural, pharmaceutical industries, they are constantly entering in and out of our bodies. So our definitions as a culture, as a society, they have to adapt as well. Do I have some time?
1 minute.
Because I want to talk about one project called Genital Panic. And so, because we're so focused on the genitals for defining these categories. And I don't have the image now, but I presented it last night. But when a child is born in the hospital with ambiguous genitalia, the doctor usually performs a surgery to make the child male or female. And it's based on these measurements that a clitoris has to be between 0 and 1 centimeters, and the penis has to be between 2.5 and 4.5 centimeters, and anything in between requires surgery. And it makes me question, like, who made the numbers? Who determined these categories of normativity, and how are they still being policed and surveilled today? And a lot of it comes from science. And as a biohacker, I'm very interested in critiquing science and critiquing the power relations that science brings, how there is a certain hierarchy that is established, whether it's the construction of race, whether it's the construction of gender or sex that science produces. And so in Genital Panic, I'm speculating on what would be a queer feminist population study. So in Genital Panic, I'm proposing that we collect these 3D genital scans into a database. And I want to get at least 200, because that's the average sample size that science uses to conduct these population studies and then draw their objective truths. So if I ever manage to create this database, I would like the database to serve as a new foundation for redefining genital aesthetics because of this extremely intoxicated era that we live in today. We live in times of permanent pollution. There is no going back to some kind of purity. And I think that's what these categories are trying to enforce, with this male and female, is like, we need to have this purity, right? These pure categories. But life and biology is much messier than that. So I think I'll just end there.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yeah, I think that's what everything boils down to, right? Life is more messy than that. Yeah, Munir, do you want to respond?
I was thinking about the sample size. Then do you need 200 grown-up queer people or babies? Because with baby, you cannot yet establish if they're queer, unless you would only count for babies that are intersex. So how would that work, just practically speaking? 'Cause I'm thinking, how can we get this data set?
Yeah, so the population study I'm referring to is one that was done in Sweden, where they looked at 200 pregnant mothers.
Okay.
And then they measured the amount of microplastics in the urine of these mothers. And then when the babies were born, they measured the genitals of the babies and correlated with the amount of exposure. And so they found that the more exposure, then the more the bodies were queer, that the genitals did not, the measurements did not conform to the normal standards.
But then isn't this dangerous that being queer will be related to toxicity and pollution? Because I wouldn't like the idea that I'm just queer by the fact of my mom having eaten the wrong thing or had smoked or had plastic admission, It makes it a little bit dangerous to me that we are a deficit of pollution and not a blessing of earth in all its verity.
Right.
Even in a world before there were any plastics.
But that's the nature of that scientific study. They were purposefully asking a question with a bias, saying that there is a link between intersexuality or queerness with toxicities. So there was a built-in conclusion in this study, and that's what I'm so critical about in scientific practices.
Okay, because I would like to. You said it's a mess. I think it's if it is a mess, it's a beautiful one. But moreover, I don't think humanity is messy. I just think humanity cannot appreciate complexities and differences for the sake that we need to other. And that really starts with language. I'm not a linguistic expert. I never wanted to work with language until I found out, as a political scientist, working on all these different social and political issues, that language was everything. And that you could make a person this small within a second by using the words. That's why I'm now asking you about this link between plastics and being queer, because if we follow up on this line of the reasoning, then you would say, we need to get rid of the plastics, not for sake of the environment, but for the sake of getting rid of queer people, because they are a deficit and a polluted species.
No, I think the world have a way to find its way. I'm really happy with this enlightenment, because for me, I've always been emphasizing on the fact that we living on this earth, we have a mandate to leave this world behind in a proper way. Because if we don't do that, we have to be the living dead and come back as the unborn and back to this world and come into our own shit. Yeah? So we have that mandate to really make sure we take care of the nature. So of course, if we destroy this world, not talking about queer or other things that will come, but there will be a lot of other things that will come to this world that we didn't anticipate. If we don't take care of our climate, we don't take care of this world. So that brings me to my own story of I had an uncle in Sierra Leone. I use him also in my book, Pasheku, was a man who never wanted to get married because he doesn't want, he told me literally when I was a young kid that the sperm we carry as men is full of ancestors, and some of them, he doesn't want them to come back.
I love that idea.
He said he doesn't want them to come back, so he's not sharing it. Okay. So everybody was forcing him, his brothers, you have to get married. He said, no, I don't want to bring kids in this world because there are certain ancestors I don't want back. So I've been working with this idea of him, and he died without getting married, and he lived a very good life himself. And he doesn't want to get, he was not against culture, but he was himself. And he was a very loving person. So just to add to that, and just to add to that discussion, but coming back to what I've seen here, I think what Munir also said, we should be very careful not to make a link directly to queer, but to say if we continue to destroy this world with plastic and not taking good care, we may find ourselves in a certain situation where perhaps we didn't anticipate. Perhaps it can be a very other beautiful mess, but I don't think so.
I'm looking at the time, and I think we can take one or two questions from the audience. Do people have pressing issues? We're getting a little bit of light here. I don't see any hands. Oh, there, in the front. We have a microphone that's going to be thrown to you, and speak into it on the top.
This one.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It was so inspiring. I have a question for Munir. Because what I find so interesting is you objecting at a certain moment to this notion of us all being enmeshed in this molecular toxicity. Because that it then suddenly kind of, gets to you being able to decide for yourself, what you are, who you are, etc. But I think this we call it messiness, is everywhere. Like doing it to everybody, we're all involved in that. So in that sense, we are equal and interdependent. And so why then? I find a contradiction there, because that is also, again, language-based, what you're doing then.
I was rephrasing because I do think that we should be very specific about the words we use, and I would never call humanity a mess, for example. It's just
it can be a beautiful mess, but it isn't. Yeah, well, anyways, you don't.
And
why don't you do? Why? Because of a Christian?
Definitely so, yes.
Which is language-based, very much.
Yes, but then I choose the words that no, wait, this is value-based. For me, a value is humanity is precious, even if people can be very inhumane. That's what gets me up for Gaza, and that's what gets me up for queer rights. And I am very careful of using certain words in certain debates because queer people, LGBTQ people, are already put in this box and in this narrative of messy, complicated, too difficult, want too much. So I'm trying to rephrase and make it more positive, or at least less normative. Because if you look at the general debate regarding gender and sexual orientation, you find so many negative words or words with a very strong moral baseline used. And that's why when I talk about language at this table, I will constantly, sorry for being a language police maybe, look at the language we use and try to reshape it. Because I think we should start to appreciate and value the gender diversity that we have. And with words like math, that's not really happening.
Oh, I get that. But I
Ina, then we can talk about this more, but that's maybe also for afterwards. There's a question behind you of the person in the white with his hand raised. If you can throw it to him, the microphone. There you go. Yes.
Hi, thanks. I've got a question for Mary because, like, I just heard the reaction on the research of microplastics and queerness, and the reaction was that pollution was blamed. But could you consider, or could you see, like, queerness, it's completely reframing, as an expression of the agency of the plastic god? As a sort of, could you see...
The plastic god, you said?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you speak from more an animistic worldview, and there is agency in materials and in other things outside of what we consider living, perhaps there is an agency involving and influencing the classic.
Is there a higher power involved here?
Well, I don't want to reinforce this hierarchical, God and man, but I do believe that there is a agency in the materiality of the molecules. It goes back to the sense making. Like, they are trying to make sense. Our bodies are trying to make sense of these molecules as they bind to our receptors. I think that it's a kind of performativity, right? Like, how these molecules are theorizing in our bodies. And but rather than seeing the plastic particles as like a god force, I actually, I want to allude to Heather Davis in her paper on the plasticine, this queer futurity. And she actually talks about the plastic molecules as our kin, as our children, which I find very fascinating because it goes into this legacy that we're leaving behind. And what does it mean if we care, for our plastic kin? That would totally reframe how we think of the world, I don't believe in just like cleaning up everything, because I think it's impossible now. I think it's more that we have to start from this moment of like, the plastics are our children. We created this legacy, and what can we build from this? It's a radical acceptance, and the fact that, again, accepting that we are very permeable with the environment, that the children that we have created, we're going to mutate with them.
Yep.
So
I have
a social responsibility there.
I have a question from the audience at home that I think is nice to close off with, coming from Marta, and they write, I love the advice to focus on love, but most people don't know how to define it or what love is. So maybe as a last question to the panelists, what is a good way to love oneself and others?
Well, Baba, as you brought it up, you can go first.
No, I think if I can go back to what Nelson Mandela once said, that hate, we can learn. We learn to hate. And if we can learn to hate, love comes very natural. So that one is just part of human being, what we are. And of course, loving oneself is very important. And how to do that, I think, is sometimes very personal, but also depends on the way your environment, the behavior of your environment. In most African countries, especially in Sierra Leone, when somebody gets sick, it's not you that is sick, it's the environment that made you to get sick. So the environment has a responsibility to make sure that you are cured. So that whole mental illness thing is something which is a society. So if we as society make sure we love each other, are for each other, I think that's where it starts. You can love yourself, but your love for yourself is also dependent on the love your community, people around you have for you. So I think we should begin very basic. Let's recognize each other as human beings first. before you start to label people.
Yeah, thank you. Mary?
So when I look at all the phobias we have in this world, you know, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, I think that all comes from a lack of love and a lack of self-love. You know, when you don't love yourself, you're not able to see the love and humanity in others. And I would also define love as vulnerability. I think so many strategies and even arts can come from a place of love and vulnerability, but oftentimes we see a lot of practices come out of hate, out of fear. So I think love is the answer. But, you know, it takes courage to love. It takes courage to practice love as a daily ritual for yourself and for the people around you. You know, love is not a feeling, it's an action.
I am reminded of this famous part in the Bible in 1 John 4 that says, God is love. What is love? Is God. Who doesn't know love doesn't know God. Love excludes all fear because fear is related to punishment. But in love, in God's perfect love, there is no punishment. And I think especially the word punishment is very important in the context of sexual orientation and gender identity. For the sake that most people feel punished by being it, or by having a daughter, son, or child that is like that, or a partner who turns out to be that way, or to be confronted with these ideas that challenge then their own sexual and gender identity. And love is not a primary emotion like happiness or sadness. It is the most primary driving source. If we turn God into love, so it means the creative force, the creative power in itself is love. And the thing that I really believe is that anger is a great force for protest, for action. But love is the only sustainable force for change. And if you look at the most famous change agents in the world of our time and age, like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King, or Gandhi, they were all focused on love beyond the anger. So anger would keep people moving, but it was love that really led to sustainable change, even though imperfect. And so if we can love ourselves without fear for punishment, then we can love the other and will not punish them for being different than us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Amen.
So,
Yes.
to come there, I think closing here, what I take from it is that we live in a world where maybe having more choices, although I'm not sure if choice is the right word, led to more confusion. But I hope that we can embrace that fuzziness, which maybe is a better word than messiness. Creativity. What I also take from this is a focus that we need to, or refocus that we should have on community living instead of the nuclear family. And what I really will take on, which I also think is very nice to take into the weekend, is love as a strategy for our everyday lives, but also for change. I really want to thank my guests, Munir Samuel, Babatan Ali, and Mary Magic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you also to the audience here, to the audience at home as well. Next up in this venue, in the attic, at 1:45, there is a screening followed by a Q&A with artist Julika Rudelius about gender, power, and interpersonal relations and the vulnerabilities that arise in the human need for belonging within late capitalism. You can also see Munir again at 3:30 on the main stage here with his talk, I'm Leaving, in which he contemplates becoming a reverse migrant. Thanks again to all. Enjoy the festival.